We only had one night in San Pedro de Atacama, so it was already time to hit the road and go to the next place. And to save us about 26 hours by road, we decided to fly. Because for those that don't know, Chile is a super long and narrow country with a length of over 2,600 miles. So we decided to fly from Calama Airport to Santiago.
The morning after our flight, Beth was still bedridden, and in order to not waste the day, I decided to head out and see a bit of Santiago by myself. Starting with a wander through the downtown area, where they had this absolutely ginormous flag right outside the National Palace. I then walked down into Santiago's underground system, and took a tube through to Tobalabra. I headed to a local decathlon to buy some socks and sunglasses. Afterwards I thought I'd have a stroll down the Mapocho River. It turned out to be a bit naff, and the sculpture work left a lot to be desired. What a crap lion. So instead I brought myself a ticket to go up El Costanera, the tallest building in South America, and 5th largest in the Southern Hemisphere. And the views of the city and the surrounding Andes Mountains was absolutely ridiculous. Almost as ridiculous as the speed of the lift on the way back down. As it was a Sunday, a lot was closed. After seeing some of the main squares, I bought Beth a McDonald's and headed back to the room, as we had a big day the next day.
The next morning I somehow dragged myself out of bed, but as you can see, I wasn't very happy about it. But we had a schedule to stick to, because today was the day we picked this beast up. An uninsulated 1.5 litre Chevrolet NV400, 102 horsepower. It's pretty. We were then straight on the road, driving through the wine region, where we headed towards Santa Cruz, ready for an activity that we'd booked in a few days ago, whilst I wasn't ill. So there I was, ready and raring to go for some Chilean wine tasting at Viña Viumanent, but not before I had an emergency nap in the back of the van. We started with learning some history about the vineyard and how the roots grow underground, and then saw this family portrait where it turns out Zac Efron's granddad actually owns the gaff. We then had a wander around the vineyard, which was very much out of season, before going on a horse and carriage tour around the site, which I will say was not the one whilst under the weather. Next up it was time for the tasting, where I genuinely didn't know if I was going to throw up or not. We tasted 5 wines, some reds, some whites, and somehow managed to complete the tasting without throwing up. But it's safe to say we still don't know anything about wine, despite this being about the 7th wine tasting we've done together. This was definitely the poshest one we've ever done, and they even had spitting bowls, which we've never seen before.
An oaky after.
He even asked us at the end what our favourite grape was, and we were like, I don't know, Morrison's Green Seedless. After this we found a nearby spot to park the van, where I then slept for 12 hours straight.
We woke up the next morning to this view of a bog, along with a large selection of cow bones and skulls. We realised we'd accidentally parked on a farm, and the farm staff had locked us in. Fortunately, at 8:30 they reopened the gates, and we made our break for freedom. But they seemed like quite relaxed people, and I don't think they actually cared. And so it was on with the journey. We continued on through the hundreds of vineyards of the Chilean wine region, until we rejoined the main highway, en route to the coastal town of Concepcion. On the way we stopped off at one of Chile's many service areas, where we got a free shower and sat down for some breakfast. As you can imagine, the locals were quite interested in our van, so we ended up sharing our breakfast with a selection of chickens. And surprise, surprise, in the middle of nowhere at a service station, Beth was able to make a 4-legged friend, in the form of this super old stray dog. We continued on the journey until we reached Salto del Laja, which was a large waterfall en route to our final destination. As with all our visits, we seemed to be the only ones there, so we took some time to chill out and take in the amazing views. Soon after this we were back on the road, where we realised I'd failed to pay attention to the fuel gauge. The nearest petrol station was about 45 kilometres away, but luckily we made it on the fumes we had left.
The next morning we were straight back on the road, with a little stop off for a McDonald's breakfast, overlooking the sea. We took in some of the desolate sights before we got straight back in the van and back on the road to head to the next destination. And this time we were travelling from Concepcion to Villarrica, the start of the Chilean Lake District. And here's some snippets of the drive there. Most of it was like this, driving through lush forests with barely any other cars on the road. But occasionally you would get a lorry carrying tons of logs on it, making it feel like something out of Final Destination. But we cheated death and carried on the journey, with this drive taking about 5.5 hours. The plan was to smash through the first 2 weeks, with not much chill, to leave more time for Patagonia. We finally arrived in Villarrica and went straight for a walk along the lake. It was super pretty, and even had a churro stand, where Jack obviously got some, and a little marina, where I imagine they do boat day trips in the peak season, and the saddest looking pedalos you've ever seen. Then we looked like homeless people while we sat and cooked soup at the side of the footpath. Then we had a little wander around the town, which actually seemed like it had a lot going on, before heading to bed.
Woke up with these beautiful views of Villarica Lake from its shores in the town of Pucon. Since we wanted to cook breakfast, we decided to get back on the road. So we took a short trip through the mountains to Lake Kaburga, where we parked the camper van on the sandy shores next to the lake and cracked on with some breakfast, which consisted of fried eggs on toast. And by toast I do mean warm bread, because we didn't have a toaster. The views from where we parked were absolutely stunning. And while we sat and enjoyed the sunshine, we were joined by this small bird of prey called a caracara. This also seemed like a good time to have a quick tour of the van. Through the side door you could find our sleeping area, which consisted of some very small pieces of sponge as a mattress and pillows that weren't supplied with pillowcases. Round the back we had our cooking and dining area, the fold-out table that was constantly falling over, slide-out drawers where we kept our pots and pans and cutlery, as well as all our food and water for the trip, a small camping stove for cooking on, and a small fridge that was run by a solar panel on the roof. After an intense cookery session of warming bread and frying eggs, we sat down to enjoy them in the sunshine, at which point we were joined by some very, very loud seagulls. Oh, and a whole bunch of caracaras, which made them a little less special. We spent the day planning out the stops for the rest of the trip. We took an hour's drive across country to Lake Calafquen, where after cooking some nice burgers for dinner, we stood by the shoreside and watched the sunset. And if you were wondering, no, there was no toilet facilities, so I ended up having to poo in a bag and store it for the night under the van.
We woke up the next morning and admired the view while we were brushing our teeth. And after Jack had another poo in a bag, we headed on our way. This time we went from Calafquen to Puyehue. The main fuel stations in Chile are called Copex, and we got very used to having these hot dogs at every stop. You might also be wondering, how do you shower? Well, we have to plan it. So today we booked in at this hot springs. This one cost about 15 quid each and we stayed in there for about 3 hours. And then took literally all of our shower gear in. To have a nice hot shower at the end. This place was inside the national park, so it was really picturesque and peaceful. Just what we needed after lots of driving and constant bouts of illness. We then drove a bit further to find our camping spot for the night, where I was greeted by this big fluffy stray. Then we chilled out and got some dinner on the go. And then it turns out we were staying right near a military exercise area. So Jack decided to have a little walk and check out the very basic military boats.
After waking up next to the river and having another breakfast of fried eggs on warm bread, we headed into the Puyehue National Park, to an area called Anticura, which was an area known for its beautiful waterfalls. After a short hike through the woods, we made it to the first set of waterfalls, known as Salto del Indo. And yet again we got to enjoy them, being the only ones there. After this, it was a 20-minute walk through the woods to find the next waterfall, which was called Salto de la Princesa, which wasn't quite as impressive as the first one, but the surrounding pool was an amazing shade of turquoise. We then headed on to our final waterfall, called Salto Rapucara. This one was far more aggressive than the previous two, and because of this the whole area was super humid. So we quickly took some photos and then headed back to the van, where it was time to head down to the town of Puerto Varas, where we would spend the night, before visiting the city of Puerto Montt the next day.
After breakfast we made the short drive to Puerto Montt, where we had a wander around the city, which had some really nice buildings, and historically had a lot of German influence, but it didn't actually have much going on there, so we thought it was a bit underwhelming. So we jumped in the car and continued on to Petraway, where it hammered it down all night, but the views were very beautiful, so we'll let it slide. And you might be wondering, how did they find these camping spots? Well, it's an offline map called Overlander, where it lists all the best wild camps. We debated going for a walk the next morning, but it was still hammering it down, so we decided to just get on the road because we had quite a long drive. And it turns out this was a good idea, because what we thought would be a paved road was most definitely unpaved, and there were tons of roadworks because of a recent landslide. So after what felt like about 10 hours of driving, we finally arrived in the town of Horno Piren, which was a cute town, but again, hammering it down. And not much to do other than walk. So we decided to treat ourselves and booked in at this cabana for the night, complete with indoor cooking facilities, a bed, a shower, a log burner, and even Netflix. Come on!
I woke the next morning surrounded by hills and farmyard animals, and joined a very short queue of cars ready to board our ferry to Patagonia. We waited about an hour and a half, and then it was time to drive on. And for some reason the ferry was parked at a 45-degree angle to the ramp, which was a bit confusing. But our little postal van made it on without any issues. And we parked up ready for the 3.5-hour journey. The first section would take us down through the Comau fjords, at which point we would disembark the ferry, drive 10 kilometres across land on a gravel road, then board another ferry to cross the Rennehu fjord, at which point we'd disembark at Caleta Gonzalo. Once the ferry was full, we set off on our way. And although the skies were a bit grey, the views were still pretty impressive, with huge mountains either side of us, each with its own waterfall that cascaded down into the seas we were sailing on, and some of them were absolutely massive. At one point, while looking over the side, I was surprised to see a small penguin swimming in the water, but since I got no video evidence, Beth doesn't believe this actually happened. We disembarked for our land crossing and it felt very much like getting off at Jurassic Park. And after 10 kilometres on the gravel roads, with a substantial amount of potholes, we arrived at the next boarding ramp and were straight on to the next ferry, where again we were presented with massive mountains and lots of waterfalls. Sadly, no penguins this time. Once we were back on dry land, we were given a cruel awakening to the roads of Patagonia. The first section was 60 kilometres of unpaved road, huge rocks and lots of potholes. You didn't want to get too close to the sides, or you could end up like this truck driver, who I imagine also got eaten by dinosaurs like that fat guy in Jurassic Park. Since we wanted to get a move on down to some of the bigger national parks, we had a quick stop off in the town of CHILE and pushed on as far south as we could before the sun set. Fortunately for us, we'd moved back onto wide, smooth tarmac road, which seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see, which meant we could go a lot faster and we were a lot more comfortable along the way. And we were treated to views of more mountains, more waterfalls, beautiful bridges and large blue rivers, before we finally reached our wild camping spot for the evening. So we pulled off the main highway and parked up between the trees next to this beautiful river, where we chilled out, cooked some dinner, and then almost froze to death in our sleep because it was about -8 degrees.
I'll sit it!